Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, David. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. Kate, first question is a quick fire one. In 10 seconds or less, what is it that you do?
I'm a health performance nutritionist, and my team and I work with athletes, corporates, and individual clients.
Brilliant. That was possibly the shortest. That was 5 seconds. Shortest one today. Nice one.
Actually, I get so panicked with a timeline. I'm like,
Yeah, nobody knows it comes, and it's nice to set the scene for people listening. But yeah, I suppose, Kate, just first before we dive into things a little further, give us a little bit of context behind that. Where was NutriKate born, I suppose?
Yeah, so NutriKate started back in 2017, and I suppose from my own career to date, like I was very fortunate that from a young age I knew I wanted to go down the route of nutrition. I play, sport competitively, and I suppose from a young age I saw the value in paying a bit of attention to my nutrition. And in transition year at school, I got to, I suppose, shadow a nutritionist, and she was just delivering talks to, I think it was Dublin Bus at the time, and uh, obviously a completely different demographic to, me as a 15-year-old girl playing with my teammates on a basketball court. But again, I could see the benefit that information could and was having on a completely different population. So I was like, geez, like this is super interesting. Like nothing has ever really captivated me the way these sessions were. So I was like, right, there's something here. So from really that point onwards, I, was focused. I knew I wanted to study nutrition. I ended up doing food science in UCD, and then I went on and did my master's at Loughborough University in sport and exercise nutrition. And from there, I worked in a consultancy over in the UK, progressed to senior health and performance nutritionist over there. Was very lucky. I got, hands-on experience with elite athletes, corporations, one-to-one clients from the get-go. And then I suppose I always knew I wanted to do my own thing. So 2017, I came back to Ireland and set up NutriKate. And, from there, now we're a 4-man, I think 5-man tomorrow. So team, which is great and kind of bizarre. Like you always want it and you want to keep growing, but then when it's happening, you're like, oh my God. I'm just like, it's just, yeah, great and so exciting. So it's been great. Like I've learned a lot of lessons, I suppose, from 2017 to now, both as a practitioner, as a business owner, and obviously with the pandemic thrown a huge spanner in the works. I've had to, I've learned probably more lessons than I would have hoped to have learned at this stage, but it's all good. I think, take them as learning curves. But yeah, so hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea as to me and the story, I suppose, behind NutriKate.
Yeah, brilliant. But I suppose all things considered with COVID and everything else, it's fantastic that your team, you are taking on a new staff member tomorrow. So kudos to that. Yeah, and I suppose it gives people context, Kate, as well, that you do work with a wide variety of people, no more than we do. And I think we share very similar values, and even in our approach to coaching and whatnot. Everything's evidence-based. We look at changing core behaviors rather than just throwing things at people. So the reason, I suppose, just chatting in the background before this, we were saying that we wanted to go through kind of female only stuff or female specific stuff, even though that this applies to kind of everyone. I think that directing this episode towards females, it'll open their eyes coming from a female. Just because sometimes when I say it, I might fall on deaf ears sometimes because we're always talking about it. So, Kate, I suppose let's just get started in, what would you say, just the first thing that comes to your head in terms of the biggest mistakes that you see ladies in general making when it comes to fat loss? Because we know a lot of people want to change the nutritional habits for fat loss. We know we need to calorie deficit and all that. That's been done to death. We know all that. But what are the biggest mistakes that we see, that you see?
Well, I think it's kind of a mentality of all or nothing, or like go hard or go home. Like I almost feel like we try to take on board, and again, it's not necessarily specific to females, but I do think, this kind of, instead of, running before we can walk kind of thing, where, we try to take on an awful lot, or try to go to extremes almost to achieve where we want to get to. And while that might, in some instances, not always, it might get you to that point, but then it's a case of, okay, well, looking, is it keeping you where you want to be, or have you got something in place to ensure that it does keep you at that place that you deem to be optimal for you, or your kind of sweet spot. So I definitely think, trying to change an awful lot at once, or really restrict yourself, is something that time and time again we get faced with. Whereas if we took a more kind of steady approach, and gained an understanding, because you talked about calorie deficits and whatnot, but often all that knowledge doesn't link up. And again, not specific just to females, that we're not
Yeah.
joining the dots, but I think that's a collective thing. We're not, while we might see these different messages, I do think there's an awful lot of different messages, and the dots don't always, or the stars don't always align. So I do think it's important to kind of make sure that the fundamental basis that you're using to try and get towards your goals are understood, and that you've got guidance in that point, in that area.
It's why a coach is so important, though, because we know that the information that we want technically is at our fingertips. We know we can go onto Google and get a training plan, and we can find out about what a calorie deficit is, and how to lose weight, and how to maintain it, and how to change habits, and all this stuff. But as you said, it's joining the dots, it's aligning the stars, and it's kind of getting through that information, that sea of stuff that doesn't matter to you as a person. But like, a couple of things resonated with me there in terms of is it getting to where you want and what's optimal for you, etc. How much of that, though, is dictated by past dieting behaviors, environment that they're surrounded by? Because the reason I'm saying that is that we've had clients in the past where they could be with us for 6 months to a year beyond, and would have went through the principles with them, gone through the education, and actually made a massive amount of progress from where they would have started. Because like, these people might have come from Slimming World or Weight Watchers or just restrictive diets in the past. But then if they do come up with a bit of stress in life in general, it nearly knocks them back a peg or two, and they nearly default to like old dieting stuff they've done in the past. Because yes, they might be carrying an extra 5 or 6 pounds down. They're like, oh, I need to get rid of this fast right now. But they nearly forget the slow and steady approach and building habits and executing that. And they still want this instant thing. But I just can't help but feel like it's so much ingrained in their behavior from past experiences. I suppose the question I'm asking from that kid is, how big of a role does environment play?
Yeah, it's huge. Like, I mean, it definitely can make life a lot easier, or a lot more challenging for you. I do think running off of what you said there, in terms of, um, if something happens or there's stress involved, like, very often we can become irrational, or what other knock-on effects are happening. So for example, if you've got a lot on your plate, are you scrimping then, say, on sleep? Are you scrimping on time with friends? Are you scrimping on other areas of your life that really help you feel so much better? And as a result of that, okay, well then other things start to get muddled. So it's, you start reverting back to type, and you're losing kind of a clear cut idea of where you wanted to be, or what you even had in place. So I do think taking time and valuing that. So when I say taking time, like, I mean, you're like, geez, I'm up to my eyes, like, what you're one on about taking time, like, I wish I had time to take. but that often can mean taking a moment to and I read this the other day, and because we're constantly looking for, okay, well, if we want people to change in a positive manner and change their behaviors, like what are these easy wins? And it's almost like figuring out those easy wins, but then I want to break them down even more to make them so like super easy, and that really, everyone has an opportunity to even get on that ladder towards that, ideal habit change that they want to make. So one thing was, can you write down, encompass kind of how you're feeling at the end of a day in one word? Like, so really, like, that's something that's all of a sudden sounds like, well, yeah, I can write a flipping word on a piece of paper. Like, it's not going to break my back. So I do think taking that moment to reflect and say, like, hold on a minute here, like, pull yourself out of that kind of chaos that's being created because something hasn't gone to plan. And can you kind of take a moment to just see, okay, well, what was working for me and what is making me feel better? Because often I think we live in well, not so much maybe anymore, but still, like, I mean, businesses are going on, life is going on for a lot of people. So while in the grand scheme of things, things have slowed down to some degree, there's still, there's stresses, there's timelines, there's still all these things. While circumstances might have changed, there's still these pressures in people's lives. So I do think kind of taking a moment to go back to, okay, well, what was working, and how can I, is there a compromise I can make to try and get somewhere back there that still allows me to get stuff done or move forward, but in a manner that's not going to leave me in a worse position. So, and then I'm trying to think of your question, because I kind of went off on a tangent.
No, you didn't really. It's brilliant, because like, in times of stress, we do default to old habits and behaviors, and it's why habit formation is so fucking big. Like, if we don't change stuff at the core level, we're not going to change stuff for the long term. So if a diet that was 0 carb or borderline keto helped us lose 10 pounds in the past, and we did it 5 years ago, even though we've learned so much to date, if we do get super stressed and we're in that kind of funk, we're going to want something that's instant and now. And I know in the back of my mind, if I go on keto this week, I'll lose 2 pounds or 7 pounds because I'll drop a hip of water weight. Even though people know deep down that it's not going to work for them long term, it's not going to be sustainable, it's not going to make them happy. I think ladies still go back to it a little bit more than men. I'm not saying men do this as well, but I think that it's a diet culture thing with ladies. It's shown to us in the media every day of the week. It's shown to us in magazines. Not us, I'm not a lady, but you know what I mean? And I think you really shown the holistic picture there of nutrition should not take away from family and friends and doing stuff that we love. But I think a lot of the time it does. And it becomes all encompassing, is that the right word I'm using? But it becomes the center of focus for someone when it shouldn't be. So fat loss shouldn't be something that's on your mind 24/7. Nutrition shouldn't be something that consumes your day every single day, every week of the year. Maybe that rejogs your memory and what you wanted to talk about. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
no, absolutely. And I do think that kind of, highlights something in the sense of, how much emphasis are we placing on our own kind of worth or well-being, or self-worth, really, and interlinking that with, our appearance or our body. And like, I mean, like, that's something I suppose I think it's prevalent in both males also, but from a female perspective, it's, even from my own perspective, like growing up over the years, and I'm still learning, and I'm still, I suppose, as my own person, still getting more comfortable with my appearance, and that can fluctuate based on day to day or week to week or month to month, and I suppose not hanging so much emphasis on that element and my worth, and interlinking those things, because they're not like what you're seeing on a scale versus who you are as a person aren't tied in together. Like, you're not, because you weigh a certain weight doesn't make you a better or worse person by any stretch. And I think a big thing actually with all of this, David, is there's a lot of things that we allow go on in our own minds, and there's an awful lot of talk that can be extremely negative that we permit, that we can let go around and manifest in our own head. But if you, for 1 second, if your best friend or your sister or someone was to turn around and say, the exact same thing, you'd be like, will you actually catch hold of yourself here? Will you? You're talking absolute shite. Like, come on. But we allow it to go on. Whereas if you actually were that person for a friend or someone saying it, you would stop it in its tracks there and then. So again, I like, one thing that I definitely wanted to look at going into 2021, and I think it was a big learning curve from 2020 and all that's been going on, and not that we're out of the woods by any stretch, unfortunately, but I think being kind to yourself is so important. And while that's not necessarily related to nutrition per se, but it does tie in with those changes that we want to make, and being that best friend to yourself when you need it, or recognizing like, hold the phone here, I'm actually being a cow to myself and there's no need. Like, would I say this to my best friend Jenny? Would I say this to my mom? Would I say that? No, I absolutely wouldn't, and I wouldn't tolerate them going on like that. So I think, being kinder to yourself is super important.
100%. It happens to males too, but I don't think we want to show it as much as females might do, or we just bottle up and we don't talk about it that much. Like, I see it with my own training, for example. I know it's a smaller thing, but like, I used to, if I missed a training session, if I missed half a training session, I used to feel so guilty about it and beat myself up over it mentally, like, and
Yeah.
for a long time I didn't realize I was doing it until, even like Robbie, one of the coaches here, I started to ask him more stuff, because he used to kind of just settle my head in it and just say, look, here's the facts. Let's move on from that. And now I find myself doing it then to a couple of other coaches, because I kind of handle their training programming as well for them. And we all kind of bounce off each other. But I think it just makes you realize that, again, when I'm tired, or if I'm stressed out, or I have a lot going on, I start to lose sight of those basic things. And I kind of technically have like mini mentors in the background keep me on track, because I'm getting that daily nod or that daily kind of pep talk that I might need sometimes. But and I'm just highlighting that because men do it to themselves. And I know they do it with their nutrition too, but again, they mightn't publicize that as much as females do. I think that whole emphasis of being kinder to yourself is massive, because it is all interlinked. Like, if we're stressed and we feel that, or we're being too hard on ourselves, we're going to try to come up with a solution to that by punishing ourselves with some diet or some nutrition, some nutritional thing that just does not serve us in any way. And I suppose it links back again to education. It links back to accountability and all these other things that we do need to really grow as a person, in terms of, all right, how do I make this nutritional stuff work for me and not fucking work against me? And back to the educational point, Kate, like, I think the myth side of it, the pseudoscience, the stuff that is just not true, like, ladies and men need to know that stuff, because if they don't know it and they're defaulting to old behaviors and old diets, how can they move past if they're not aware that eating carbs in the evening is fine? How can they move past if they realize that they don't have to go vegan? Or, it's having this all encompassing approach. Did you want to say
And I
something then?
suppose actually, yeah, on that note, like, going back to your environment and using it to your advantage, like, so, something you mentioned there about mentors have, you might have a few people in the background that kind of help pull you out of whatever headspace you're in. Like, so one element of using your environment to your advantage is, if you've got really good people in your life that help you feel better, like, trying to keep them there when shit is hitting the fan, or when you're getting stressed, like, not like, recognizing that that is a priority. The same way with food, for example, and nutrition. Like, if like, I find it really difficult to manage portion sizes with X, Y, and Z food. Can I have do I have them in the house but I have them out of sight? Do I not leave food around that I can pick at, because that's going to upset my meal patterns, and I know when I've got some sort of structure, it stands to me a lot better. So just, again, going back to that environment, and same goes with social media. So you mentioned there about myth busting and whatnot. Um, Making a point, like, we do spend more time than we probably should in the grand scheme of things on social media. It has got a huge influence. So like, even going through accounts being like, why am I following this person or that entity? Like, are they adding or are they taking away? Do I feel better after their content? Do I feel worse? Like, doing a bit of a cleanse on your social media, I think, doesn't do any harm. And I've started to tip away at that, because sometimes I'm like, you can come off of social media and like, oh my God, like, I actually, my anxiety is through the roof. I am really stressed. Like, something that I wasn't even thinking about now is to the forefront of my mind and it's bothering me.
Mm.
So again, if you are finding that you're someone that's landing into social media more often than not, make sure that it's an environment that isn't going to, is the best environment for you, and isn't going to maybe, reiterate shite that had worked so hard and you've got an understanding for it, but all of a sudden it's up and it looks really dazzling and there's loads of people liking, and you're like, it's questioning, or maybe, muddling the water for you. So I think that's something, again, that is important too, like using that your environments to your advantage, instead of kind of reeling you back in, or confusing you, or setting you up for failure.
Brilliant. So like, you touched on three main things there, really, like people, and surround yourself with those people a bit more, keep in touch with them a bit more. Your environment could relate to work and at home, I think. Like that out of sight, out of mind thing, you said it really quickly, but I think it's so big. It's something that we do a lot with pretty much all our clients. Have the foods that are conclusive to your goals, we'll say, even if that's just for healthy eating or you want to be a healthy person. Like, having apples and bananas visible in your countertop is a lot better than having a 12 pack of Wispas, which I have tucked away in my press. But it's having the stuff conclusive to your goals visible. It's having the stuff that, not saying you're not allowing yourself some flexible foods or whatnot, but have them in a place where, like, if somebody goes on about trigger foods, for example, one of the first things I say to them is, right, where are they coming? And they're like, oh, after dinner, close to bed, I'll take out a full pack of biscuits. It's like, right, who else eats biscuits in the house? And yeah, somebody might pick at them, but like, do you really need the fucking things? Get rid of them. Don't buy them straight away. That issue could be gone. And yes, it'll become a behavior to change it at the core level over time, but don't buy the stuff that fucking triggers you. Have a couple of treats stuff that you can dip into, but if you find that at the start you're dipping into it more than often, make them harder to get in a fucking press. People don't value this stuff. They think, oh, sure, Dave, it's in the press, I'm going to get it. But if it's in the press, on the top press in the back, it's so inconvenient. You're not just going to get it super easy. And I think that is something that, like, we work on that an awful lot with our clients, and we don't make a big deal of it. We just kind of say it, and we ask them how it's going, and they're like, yeah, it actually fucking works. But that stuff is important when it comes to environment change and habit change. The myth stuff, I suppose. Well, like, one thing I did want to get into, partly I want to touch on a few myth things. All right, but let's kick it off with the first one, because it's something that I've only heard in the last couple of weeks again, and it is this belief that, right, it's New Year, and now I need to go vegan because vegan is healthier, and it's going to help me lose weight. What would you say to somebody who sprung that on you?
Yeah, so again, I suppose first and foremost, like, I mean, you can go vegan and be healthy, and for some people it means that they're paying an awful lot more attention. Like, I was doing a talk recently and someone said, oh, I cut out sugar, and I've stopped buying processed foods, and I've been taking more care of what I'm putting into my body, blah blah blah. And she was like, and I feel amazing. And I was like, yeah, brilliant, because you've started to pay more attention to what you were doing. So it's not that you've cut out the sugar. We didn't ever need to get to that extent, but you've started taking pride in what you're doing, and you're introducing more nutrient dense foods. So, for some people, a vegan diet can allow that, I think, or encourage those positive behaviors. So being more mindful of what you're eating, preparation is key. I do think, though, it's not the only way to be healthier. And with that, you can go vegan and maybe you're not making good choices. It's all convenience foods that you're opting for. And in that case, well, then, you're not going to be healthier for it. So I think it's very important to know about why are you doing, if it's specific to weight loss, do you need to go to that extreme where,
Mm.
because it's cutting out a whole load of options. And if that's coming from an ethical perspective or something you truly believe in, well, yeah, why wouldn't you do it? Like, of course you can do it, and we can do it with correct guidance. You can do it to make sure that your health is supported. But I suppose it stems back to what I mentioned at the beginning, and trying to take a leap when you don't need to. Like, so it's like paring it back, and even working on things like you mentioned yourself, David, like you and your team are working with clients in and around their environment, and simple changes from that perspective, can see a huge reward. So again, I think it's from going vegan in January and trying that off, like, it is an extreme, and not for everyone, but can be for most. And it doesn't
Mm.
need to be done um if unless you have some ethical considerations or beliefs. And fair enough, get guidance, make sure all the boxes are ticked in terms of maybe nutrients that you're might be missing out on, and that you're doing it in a healthy and constructive and prepared manner. And again, like all things, if you're going to make that transition, it might take a little bit of donkey work, but chances are, if you are going to make a decision like that, and it's for true beliefs that you might have, this might be a slow progression that you're doing, or something that you've
Mm.
really looked into and thought long and hard about. But for those of us who maybe are doing it because someone that you follow online is doing it and is advocating it, um
Mm.
that doesn't mean it's going to work for you, and it can be a torture and unnecessary torture, um because you're ill-informed, or you're kind of jumping before thinking and assessing, well, do I actually need to do this? But there are some positives from it, from improving the food choice that you're making, your fruit and vegetable intake, your legume intake. But again, you can do all that without becoming vegan also.
Yeah, 100%. I think sometimes when I might blatantly take the piss out of vegans on Instagram by throwing a steak in a pan and pretending to become a vegan. I'm not doing it from a place of, oh, I just bash vegans. It's just like, I do have a problem with people just jumping on the bandwagon, and then 2 months down the line, they end up start feeling like shit because, yes, they're not getting the essential vitamins and nutrients they need because they're lacking those, or they're not getting enough protein, and their training starts to go downhill. And it's the same with people jumping on the keto diet bandwagon, and it's still massive at the moment, especially the last few weeks. Again, I've seen like just celebrities pushing products, and it's scary when you read the comments of the amount of people that actually follow them and believe and buy into what they do, but they don't question for
Yeah.
a minute that this person is not a qualified nutritionist, they're not a dietitian, they don't have any background in nutrition whatsoever. But okay, they're in a bit of shape, they're selling this, let's buy it. Like me and you, we know that we'd never buy into that because we're educated around it, and we know that it's BS at the end of the day. But there is a lot of people out there that do buy into it. And even if they don't buy into that, they buy into other stuff like, oh, I need to go clean eating for the next 8 weeks. I need to cut out carbs because it's going to help me lose weight really quick because I read it online or read it in an article. Even though I still know that I need to adhere to a calorie deficit, change habits. But I read this now and it's changed my mind because I can lose 7 pounds the next week. It's just that's the shit I have beef with, because it leads people down a path that's just misleading. But I suppose on the vegan thing as well, and I had this conversation 2 days ago with one of the lads who was questioning me on it, and I just had to remind him. And it's the same with red meat, because red meat gets a bad bashing in the media as well. And if you look at the research behind people that predominantly eat red meat eaters, the majority of them don't exercise. They smoke, they drink a lot of alcohol, they just lead unhealthy lives in general. And those are the people that tend to eat a lot of red meat in this science. So yes, there is going to be probably more health issues associated with that. Does it mean that if you eat red meat, you're going to get unhealthy and develop these cancers and diseases and everything? No, it does not. And I think people forget that point. It's the same with vegans and vegan research and vegetarian research, in that people that are going down those realms, yes, they might be doing it for ethics and beliefs, which is perfectly fine, but they do it right. And those people in general are health seeking individuals. And that's a big word that people don't even know about. Like those people are seeking better health alternatives. So yes, the research might show that technically this group of vegan people are healthier than this group, but that other group are not health seeking individuals. So you touched on it there, like, yes, of course you can do it the right way, or you can do it the arseways way. But you can also achieve health, fat loss in other healthy, sustainable ways without going down extreme routes. But you have to be prepared to put in the work. You have to be prepared to learn. And as I said, keep saying, change habits at the core level and be consistent with that over time. Anything I'm missing out on there, Kate, do you think?
No, I think a key thing there is, anything where, you mentioned about, say, red meat in particular, but that stems across multiple things that have been deemed to be,
Mm,
horrific for our health. Is, context is super important. And there's no one thing that is driving our health or our well-being. We're complex. There's a lot going on in our lives. There's a lot going on with our diets. It's not one thing that is going to, you know, dictate the sole outcome of your health or your goals. So I do think it's important to maintain some context with, I think it's very important to have context with what you're reading, and to always look at the bigger picture. And I suppose being more, taken into account that, so I mentioned sugar there, you know,
mm.
that's one element of the bigger picture of the food that you're consuming. So, one thing that gets bandied about would be, say, well, what about the sugar in fruit? And it's like, yeah, but in fruit, yes, there is sugar, but there's also fiber, vitamins, minerals, things that are great for our health. So
Mm.
it's just, I think context is super, super important. And something to bear in mind. While your diet is one element, we also need to look at, your activity levels, sleep, other elements that feed into the picture that is your overall well-being too.
And Kate, I suppose we've talked really about health and fat loss up to this point. And one thing that you even mentioned to me before we jumped on, like you were saying, performance nutrition, because it's mainly what you do. And I was just like, yeah, but I want to ask you all this fat loss stuff first, Kate. But from here, I suppose the question I want to get at is just highlighting the importance of going like maintenance. Like, why is there this? I know obviously people want to lose weight and they want to feel a bit better by losing that weight. I understand that, but something that we highlight in the background privately when we're coaching people is that we're not going to have someone on an endless fat loss phase. It just does not work like that. We'll have people on 6-week phases, 8-week phases, maybe 12 weeks at a push. It depends on the context and what they want from it, etc. But we also place a massive importance on maintenance phases and enjoying their training. So like performance, I suppose, overall. Um, I want to touch on that, I suppose, and I want to highlight that importance of maintenance and eating for performance. You can take it down any realm you want, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think a big thing is, like, food is there to help us. Like, sometimes it can be seen as, a deterrent or a roadblock in terms of you getting from X to Y. But I think, like, a really important element to note, and again, it'll depend on where you're coming from training wise, but in order to say, reach your optimal performance on a pitch, or even in a gym setting or wherever it might be, making sure you're eating enough to support what you're doing is super important and facilitates your optimal. So I suppose from athletes that might be listening, or actually anyone who enjoys training, like getting longevity out of your training career and your training ability and performance, um you know eating enough, maintaining energy balance is so important to allow you to go on. Like, I mean, and this is why, like, any athletes that we work with, you wouldn't be looking to have coinciding, their body composition goals, so whether that's dropping body fat in particular, where they need to be in some sort of deficit, where you need them to peak for performance, because it's counterintuitive. From a recovery, from a fueling perspective, you know, they're separate things. So yeah, so I think it's important to make sure that if you're working towards a particular body composition goal, you know, that when you get there, it's about, you're going to have to then figure out, well, I did X and Y to get there, but now I really want to hone in on performance and optimizing that. So things will need to change so I can do that, because you know, sometimes it's, people can almost work up, like, I don't know, a fear, or you get set in your ways where you like, oh, but if I don't do this anymore, well then I'm going to go backwards, where it doesn't work like that. You know, you're put different strategies in place to get to where you want to be. um and then, you know, when you get there, well then you're at a different stage maybe of your goals, or your performance perhaps. So it's important to adjust for that and know that you know, provided it's done correctly and with guidance, or you've got a good understanding yourself, that, you know, you can maintain, but now you can look to maybe push the bar out in terms of how you're performing, how you're feeling recovery wise. And even from an injury prevention perspective, like, I mean, not, avoiding going around in a deficit, particularly if it's a big one, consistently will, you know, is only a positive thing from an injury prevention perspective. We also need to bear, depending on strategy you're using or how intensely you're going with the deficit, we also need to bear in mind, like, you know, your overall health and well-being. And, you know, some
Mm.
people like to go short and snappy, and, you know, I want to go hard these coming weeks and then get to my maintenance phase and go on from there. But you know, that won't suit everyone. And you know, you'll probably feel or some sort of negative outcome as a result. So you might be more irritable, or, you know, energy might be poor. And then from a female perspective, you know, I suppose our menstrual cycle is something that is a big factor in terms of, you know, if we're going around in a deficit, and maybe training an awful lot, you know, they can have a negative impact in terms of our menstrual function, which in turn has an impact on our overall well-being, both short-term and long-term. So that's something to bear in mind. So we don't want to be compromising in health the whole time, and from a performance perspective, and performance perspective, and reaching your full potential, you know, falling below maintenance isn't going to get the job done
Mm.
for you on that front, in
Mm.
terms of reaching your full capabilities.
That's brilliant. I think there is definitely a fear though of coming from a fat loss phase into a maintenance phase, especially if you've never done it before. Because a lot of people, when they stop a fat loss phase or they stop a diet, they just go back to normal ways. And that's why, yes, you potentially might gain that weight back because you've done things the same as you've always done. But doing it under proper guidance and proper education, it's a different kettle of fish. Like you're reversing the effects of dieting as well. So things like your hunger levels and your focus on food changes. You don't see food as just numbers. If you're tracking on MyFitnessPal, for example, you mightn't feel as hungry or lethargic, and you start to see the kind of boundaries you can push your body as well. Because even for our clients that aren't quote unquote athletes, even though we like to tell them in their heads, everyone, that we're all athletes at the end of the day, technically, we want you to enjoy your training. Your training shouldn't be something where I'm only training to lose weight. I'm only training to look good naked. Training should be something that makes you feel good as well. And you should really enjoy that process. And if we don't experience what it's like to have our nutrition support that, it's just going to be miserable when you think about it. Like, imagine being in a calorie deficit or trying to be in a calorie deficit year round, and your training just keeps declining and you just feel like shit the whole time and you're just irritable and snapping at people around you. It's just like that to me is just misery. But people do that. And
Yeah.
even though they might yo-yo diet, technically in your head, you're always trying to diet. So from my perspective, just from a purely like body composition point of view, it's super important for changing your outlook around things. But from a performance standpoint and on GA and etc., you have to have that there. Like, you have to fuel yourself enough to get the most out of your support. And like you said, injury prevention, recovery, etc., etc. You touched on menstrual cycle, and it's something, again, we deal privately with our ladies here. You see bits and bobs on social media about during the menstrual cycle, our energy need might go up. So therefore, eat more, come out of a fat loss phase if you're in a fat loss phase. But I don't think, based on the research anyway, and based on what we've experienced with our clients, I don't think there's a hard and set rule to this stuff. And I think every female is individual when it comes to their menstrual cycle. Before I kind of give my thoughts on it, from your own experience, Kate, even for yourself, like, and for the clients you've dealt with, when it comes to the time of the month, like, do things change from a nutritional standpoint based on if you're in a fat loss phase or not?
No, it depends. Like, I mean, very rarely. Like, I think a big thing is, as you said, I think it is very individual. So like, and we're still learning an awful lot about this area. So I don't
Yes.
think we can't really be conclusive with anything, because research that has been done in the area isn't exactly of high quality. So, you know, we need more of it done. So, and again, whatever about, you know, the menstrual cycle and figuring out about, you know, what it may or may not influence, then you've got the individuality of the females that you're dealing with. So, you know, there's so many different, like, I think is it over 150 potential symptoms in and around your period that you could experience. Yet, you know, I might experience two of them, and, you know, the girl next to me might experience none, or 10, or 15. You know, so it's about figuring out and getting comfortable with knowing, you know, what you are experiencing, what is there a pattern that's emerging. So I definitely think while the research, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, it's kind of given us an insight into and uncovering more about kind of the female body and all that goes on month to month. You know, where it's given us an idea as to maybe what might be having an influence, you know, and how we might be able to work around that. But I think it all stem back to who the person is in front of you. And I do think maybe getting females more comfortable with paying a bit more attention to their menstrual cycle, whether that's just, again, like on a piece of paper or in the notes on your phone, or using a tracking device for those who might want to take it that bit further. But I do think getting comfortable with your own body and figuring out what those patterns might look like for you will then make it easier for, you know, the person that you're working with to maybe help support areas that you do feel like you're struggling, you are struggling with. So yes, I think it's super individual, and I think it's something that, you know, as females we should look to get more comfortable with and more in tune with our own bodies, because then we can start to make changes to support those fluctuations that we might experience over our cycle.
Yeah, brilliant. It's like weighing in one instance, because you're becoming self-aware of how daily weight fluctuations can happen, and then you realize that, okay, this is not fact, this is just weight fluctuation, and then you might freak out less about weight being up one day versus the other. I do think that there is some similarities there with being more aware of your cycle and tracking that, because from what we've anecdotally seen and recommended, like, some females will be a bit lethargic. We do feel that has a direct impact on their sleep and their work life as well. So if stress is a little bit high, sleep's a little bit shit, menstrual cycle comes along, it's like, okay, yes, might be a bit more irritable this week, couldn't be arsed to train as much. And it's kind of like, it's letting them know, like, that it's okay if you're not pushing as hard in the gym that week. It's okay if you miss a session. Like, it's not a bad thing. And I think that's the worst part, is that people beat themselves up just because they feel like this. Another thing then as well is that, like, oh, I'm craving a bit more sweetie stuff. That's perfectly fine. Add in a bit more sweetie stuff. Like, even for my own partner, Kate, like, she used to just eat packets and packets of raspberries back in the day. Like, whereas now she's now it's such a habit. Like, I know, like, some weeks to be more raspberries in the fridge and more chocolate stuff, but doesn't, you know, it's not like she's binging or anything like that. It's just, it's kind of, it's satisfying that need without overly thinking about it. And it's become a habit because she's aware and understands that. And yeah, there might be some days where she might skip training because it's better to sleep and recover that day versus trying to harm yourself. And then, but that again, I think that's individual then as well to the person, that if that sounds like you, it's directly related to your work too. Like if you're a nurse working 12-hour shifts, it's a lot different to somebody who's working a super less stress job, 9 to 5, and you've time to train even, you know. So all these all these small intertwining things do make a difference to each individual. But I think to the extent though of nutritional strategies during the menstrual cycle, that is about the most of what we've ever done. It's more to the psychology of letting people know that it's okay that if you don't feel great that week, and yeah, look, if you're craving a bit more sweet stuff, that's perfectly fine. Why not just have the feckin' stuff and stop thinking that it's a bad thing? And there's never been an issue with it, like, you know.
Yeah. And again, I suppose, again, like you mentioned there, you know, maybe people feel hungrier in and around, you know, in the lead up to their menstrual cycle. Well, like if you've got someone who's working towards their goals, well, in that instance, you know, if that is something that that client feels, well, then you can allocate for that. You can allow for, you know, maybe that is a point where it might be useful moving from, you know, fat loss to a maintenance, so that, you know, you don't run the risk of someone, you know, maybe not reaching what you've set out for them, feeling bad because of it, and, you know, maybe getting a bit bogged down where it's unnecessary. So you can account for things like that. Or you mentioned sleep, like, so again, some women's sleep's affected and others aren't. But at least if you know that it gets a bit shit in the lead up to your period, or you know, while you're menstruating, we can look at maybe sleep hygiene practices. But in terms of like blanket protocols or definitive answers, like, we're not there yet. There's a lot of potential, and it definitely is so interesting because, you know, you can pull different maybe hypotheses, or, you know, you can try to uncover more information through research, but that still needs to be done, and it's an exciting area. But I think it's really stems back to, yeah, understanding yourself as a female, and being okay to chat about it. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I even remember, like, obviously I'm a female, I have a period, like, big surprise, but like, I remember when I started out, even as a practitioner, and I was like, I know this is important, but I was like, I felt uncomfortable asking other females about it, because I felt like, oh my God, do they think I'm prying almost? And that's from me being a practitioner, knowing that I need to ask X, Y, and Z, and having some understanding of where they're at. So I do think, you know, as a female, being comfortable to chat to your coach, and as a coach, and to anyone who is listening, like, I mean, obviously, David, you're a male, you're having these conversations, like, the barrier doesn't come up because you are a man, you know. So I think it's something that we all should be able to talk about and feel comfortable talking about, because it is and can be another performance marker. And even from, you know, a nutrition standpoint, one of the signs of, say, under fueling is if the menstrual cycle isn't happening and we're missing periods here and there. So it is important conversation to have, because that's going to have knock-on effects in both health and performance. So it's important that we know, and we can be open and comfortable talking about it, because at the end of the day, it's not anything wrong or incriminating. It's just flipping normal, natural, you know, things that happen to females every month. And it's super interesting and fascinating. So, like, the more comfortable we can all get with that kind of fact, and you know, fact, the better, I suppose.
Yeah, we still experience that, because we check in with our clients. Depending on how long they're with us, we'll check in. The frequency changes, but anytime there might be a menstrual related issue behind something, a lot of the females used to not bother not telling us that fact, like, you know. And then we can't coach the best that we can coach if we're not aware of what's going on in the background. But I think since I've talked about it in the past and talked about it publicly as well, I found a direct correlation in clients letting us know how they're getting on with that as well, because then we can recommend better stuff for them. And you mentioned there as well, if somebody was in a fat loss phase, and it was coming up to the menstrual cycle, and potentially if the hunger did go through the roof, and yes, if they did have a lot of stress and they just felt like it was a really negative week or two, yeah, of course we can increase calories for those weeks or that week or even half the week. We've played around with that actually a little bit, where we've brought people back to like a maintenance phase for the week. And we found it depends on the client again. Like some people are happy with that. Some people don't want to do it, but they'll accept adding a bit of calories in that week. But the biggest thing we find is that once they're educated on it, it doesn't become an issue for the future, because then they're just getting on with it month to month. And I think that's,
Yeah.
I love seeing that as a coach, like, because what used to be a problem in their head and something that they'd never really talked to people about for years, now it's not an issue anymore, because they expect it, they know how to deal with it, and they can still get on with their training and nutrition. And again, it's one of those pieces of the puzzle that just kind of adds to the whole experience, because we're big on people, like, coming from a public gym setting into us, it was a private setting. Like, we really want to make them make training and nutrition and that whole package be such a positive influence in their life, and not be a negative thing where you go in and you feel like all eyes are on you in the gym and you don't know what to do and all that kind of stuff. This just all ties into that. Like, so thank you for highlighting all that. Brilliant.
And I suppose just another thing on that, from your perspective, like, I mean, knowing that, uh, being aware of kind of the menstrual cycle thing or side of things, while there's nothing necessarily definitive, there is research even from, a recovery standpoint, where we might be, more equipped to recover quicker at different stages, or ACL injury is a problem with females, and I think it's like 3 to 6 times higher in females than it is to males, and that might be tied in with the fluctuations due to our menstrual cycle. So even from you as a coach perspective, and being aware of those things, well, if someone is having a tough time, well, while it's not definitive, at least you can be aware of it, and training load can be managed. But again, I think as our job working with people, I do think it's important that we really do dictate that kind of, making it comfortable, making it normal, because in the grand scheme of things, in the large part of things, it's not like it's, something that, you know, we've grown up. And I heard this recently enough, where they were talking about menstrual cycle, and they mentioned about like shoving like your tampon or your pad up your sleeve, like in school and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, that was me, because you're just mortified by the whole thing, when we really shouldn't be. So it's, again, if we, by working with people and creating this norm, I think it's better for the bigger picture, and yeah, it's just really, really important. So yeah, so it's great to hear that it's absolutely a thing with you guys too, and I suppose the
Oh yeah.
more, yeah, the coaches and practitioners do it, the better.
Yeah, brilliant. Again, I think of a lot of the questions that we got through Instagram as well, they were kind of interwoven throughout what we've already covered. So unless menstrual cycle was a big one, some of the myths you touched on, yeah, they're all covered there. Is that anything you feel like you'd like to add or put a closing message on? Now's the time.
Speak now or be forever silent. Yeah, I think it's a really, really important thing when it comes to your training or your nutrition, is that, working around your needs, and focusing on what's adding versus what's detracting for your life. Like, life is short, so like figuring out ways to make yourself feel better, that are in line with the life that you want to lead, is really important. So whether that's small compromises from a nutritional front to help you get a bit more veggies in your diet, or whatever it might be, to figuring out, like, we know exercise is so important for our health, both physically, mentally. So figuring out, well, what, if exercise is feeling like a chore time and time again, are you doing what suits you, or are you kind of meeting your match, so to speak, with training? And it's the same with different diets and kind of approaches that you take. If it feels like hell, well, then you're probably looking in the wrong place, because it shouldn't. And while it might take a bit of donkey work, so to speak, when you're making changes to start with, or take a bit of time. All in all, it should be something that you're like buzzing about, or is adding more in the grand scheme of things than not. Like, so team sports is a big thing for me. Like, I absolutely adore going training with my team. That is my jam. That makes it easier for me to sacrifice evenings or weekends because I love it. So it's about, well, that would be maybe hell for other people. It's about figuring out, well, what is it? So maybe it is, rocking up to the gym, working with your trainer, or YouTube and dance classes has been a big thing for me over lockdown, because it's been hard to stay motivated or to try and stay, some days you're just like, oh my God, I just want to curl up in the ball and just not do anything. So having something that I can, adds a bit of kind of fun and something different has been really important. So whether it's diet or training, it should be important that you're enjoying it for the most part, at the very, very least.
Yeah.
So figuring out, focus on you versus everyone else, or what everyone else is doing, and what's adding to your life versus actually, not being more of a negative thing.
Couldn't agree more. It's something that we always talk about, is what's adding versus taking away. So brilliant, Kate. Thank you for that. Kate, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can get me, I'm probably most active on Instagram. So you can probably get me on NutriKate_com, or you can find out more about my team and I on NutriKate.com. So yeah, they're probably the two best options.
Brilliant. I'll pop all those in the show notes page anyway for this episode. But Kate, thank you very much for coming on. Some fantastic chats there, and we'll definitely have you back on in the future. We might dive into some more performance stuff, which I'll be definitely looking forward to. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.